The Black Maid. Part 1. Maria Santos had been working for wealthy families in Manhattan for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for the Whitmore household. At 38, she had seen it all: demanding employers, spoiled children, and impossible schedules. But when the employment agency called her about a position with tech billionaire James Whitmore, she knew this could change everything for her and her own family back in the Bronx. The Whitmore mansion sat like a fortress on the Upper East Side, its limestone facade gleaming under the afternoon sun. Maria clutched her worn leather purse tighter as she approached the service entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The pay was 3 times what she had ever earned before, enough to finally send her teenage son Carlos to college and help her elderly mother with her medical bills. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore answered the door herself, which surprised Maria. Most wealthy women left such tasks to their staff. Eleanor was tall and elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than Maria's monthly rent. But there was something cold in her pale blue eyes, something that made Maria's stomach tighten with unease. "You must be Maria," Eleanor said, looking her up and down with barely concealed disdain. "The agency said you have excellent references, but I want to make something very clear from the start. This household runs on strict rules, and I expect them to be followed without question." Maria nodded respectfully. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. I understand." Eleanor led her through a series of gleaming corridors, lined with expensive artwork and antique furniture. The house felt more like a museum than a home, cold and untouchable. They passed through a grand living room with soaring ceilings and windows that overlooked Central Park, then up a sweeping marble staircase to the 2nd floor. "Your primary responsibility will be caring for my daughter Lily," Eleanor explained as they walked. "She's 6 months old and requires constant attention. You'll also be expected to handle light housekeeping duties and meal preparation when the cook is unavailable." They stopped outside a nursery decorated in soft pastels and filled with expensive toys and furniture. Inside, a beautiful baby girl lay sleeping in an ornate crib, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. Maria felt her heart soften immediately. After raising her own son, she had a natural way with children that had made her invaluable to previous employers. "She's beautiful," Maria whispered, careful not to wake the sleeping child. "Yes, well, beauty doesn't make up for the inconvenience," Eleanor replied sharply. "James insisted on having a child, but he travels constantly for business, leaving me to deal with the disruption to my social calendar and charity work. That's where you come in." Maria was taken aback by the woman's coldness toward her own baby, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago not to judge her employers, no matter how difficult they might be. Eleanor showed her to her room, a small space in the servants' quarters on the 3rd floor. It was clean but sparse, with a single window that looked out over the building's air shaft. After years of cramped apartments in the Bronx, it felt luxurious to have her own space, even if it was meant to remind her of her place in the household hierarchy. "You'll work from 6 in the morning until 9 at night, with a 2-hour break in the afternoon when Lily naps," Eleanor continued. "Sundays are your day off, unless there's an emergency. Any questions?" "No, Mrs. Whitmore. Everything sounds perfect." "Good. You start tomorrow. Don't disappoint me, Maria. Good help is hard to find, but it's even easier to replace." As Eleanor's heels clicked away down the marble hallway, Maria sat on the narrow bed and looked around her new room. She pulled out her phone and called her son Carlos, who was staying with his grandmother while Maria worked. "Mommy, how did it go?" Carlos's voice was excited and hopeful. "It went well, mijo. I got the job. This could really help us, you know? Maybe finally get you into that engineering program you want." "That's amazing, Mommy. I'm so proud of you." After hanging up, Maria unpacked her few belongings and tried to quiet the nagging feeling in her chest. Something about Eleanor Whitmore's attitude toward her own child troubled her deeply. But she had worked for difficult people before. She could handle this. The next morning, Maria arrived at the nursery at exactly 6 o'clock to find baby Lily crying inconsolably. Her diaper was soaked, and it was clear she hadn't been changed in hours. Maria's maternal instincts kicked in immediately as she scooped up the distressed infant, cooing softly in Spanish as she cleaned and changed her. "Shh, mi amor. It's okay now," she whispered, bouncing Lily gently until the crying subsided. "Maria's here to take care of you." As the days passed, Maria fell into a routine with Lily. The baby was sweet-natured and intelligent, responding to Maria's gentle care with smiles and babbling sounds that melted her heart. But it became increasingly clear that Eleanor had little interest in bonding with her daughter. She rarely entered the nursery except to give Maria instructions, and when she did interact with Lily, it was with the detached efficiency of someone handling a business obligation. Maria began staying later than her required hours, not because Eleanor demanded it, but because she couldn't bear to leave Lily alone for long periods. She noticed that the baby seemed to recognize her voice and would calm down immediately when Maria picked her up. It reminded her of the bond she had shared with Carlos when he was small, though these circumstances were vastly different. One evening, as rain pelted against the mansion's windows, Lily came down with a fever. Maria had put her to bed at the usual time, but around midnight, she woke to the sound of crying coming from the nursery. When she rushed downstairs from her room, she found Lily burning up with fever, her tiny body shaking with chills. Maria immediately called the pediatrician whose number Eleanor had given her, but it went straight to an answering service. The on-call nurse advised bringing the baby to the emergency room if her temperature rose any higher. When Maria knocked on Eleanor's bedroom door, there was no answer. She tried calling Eleanor's cell phone, but it went to voicemail. Panicking, Maria made a decision that could cost her the job. She wrapped Lily in blankets and took her down to the kitchen, where she could monitor her more closely. Throughout the long night, she sat in a chair beside the baby's portable bassinet, checking her temperature every 30 minutes and giving her small amounts of water with a medicine dropper. When Lily's fever spiked dangerously high around 3 in the morning, Maria laid out blankets on the cold kitchen floor and lay down beside the bassinet, keeping one hand on the baby's chest to monitor her breathing. She dozed fitfully, waking every few minutes to check on Lily's condition. As dawn broke, the fever finally began to break. Lily's temperature dropped to normal, and she slept peacefully for the first time in hours. Maria was exhausted but relieved. Still lying on the hard floor beside the baby when she heard the sound of a key turning in the front door. Heavy footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, moving purposefully toward the kitchen. Maria's heart sank as she realized how this must look. The help sleeping on the floor with the baby, clearly having overstepped her boundaries by bringing Lily out of the nursery without permission. The footsteps stopped at the kitchen doorway. Maria looked up to see a tall man in an expensive suit standing silently in the entrance, his dark eyes taking in the scene before him. This had to be James Whitmore, though she had never met him before. His black hair was slightly mussed from travel, and there was something unreadable in his expression as he stared down at Maria and his sleeping daughter. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Maria's mind raced with explanations and apologies, but something in his steady gaze made her stay silent. She had been caring for his child through a frightening night, but she knew that wouldn't matter if he saw her actions as inappropriate or presumptuous. James Whitmore's reputation as a ruthless businessman was well known throughout the city. He had built his technology empire through shrewd deals and an unwavering focus on results. People who crossed him or disappointed him were swiftly removed from his circle. Maria braced herself for the anger she was sure would come, knowing that her family's dreams of a better future hung in the balance of whatever happened next. The silence stretched between them as the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the unlikely scene of a maid who had sacrificed her comfort to protect a billionaire's child. Whatever James Whitmore said next would change everything, though Maria had no way of knowing whether it would be for better or worse. She held her breath and waited for his judgment, acutely aware that this moment would determine not just her own fate, but the future of the innocent baby sleeping peacefully beside her on the cold marble floor. The Black Maid. Part 2. James Whitmore crouched down beside Maria and his daughter, his expensive suit forgotten as his knees touched the cold floor. His voice, when he finally spoke, was much softer than Maria had expected. "How long has she been sick?" he asked quietly, reaching out to touch Lily's forehead with gentle fingers that seemed surprising for such a powerful man. "Since midnight, sir," Maria replied, struggling to sit up while trying not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Her fever was very high. I tried calling your wife, but there was no answer. The doctor's service said to watch her closely, and if it got worse, to take her to the hospital." James nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving his daughter's peaceful face. "And you stayed with her all night?" "Yes, sir. I couldn't leave her alone when she was so sick." Something shifted in James's expression as he looked at Maria properly for the first time. She was still wearing yesterday's uniform, wrinkled from sleeping on the floor, her usually neat hair disheveled. But her dark eyes held a fierce protectiveness that reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. "Where is Eleanor?" he asked. Though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be satisfactory. "I believe she went to Mrs. Richardson's charity gala last night, sir. She mentioned she might stay over rather than drive home late." James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had been in Singapore closing a crucial deal for the past 2 weeks, and this was his first night back. He had hoped to see Lily before she went to bed, but his flight had been delayed. Coming home to find his daughter ill and his wife absent painted a picture he didn't want to acknowledge. "You did the right thing," he said finally, surprising Maria with the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you for taking such good care of her." Maria felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "She's a wonderful baby, Mr. Whitmore, so sweet and smart." "Any mother would be lucky to have her." The comment hung in the air between them, carrying weight that neither of them acknowledged directly. James carefully lifted his sleeping daughter from the bassinet, and Maria watched as his stern face softened completely when Lily stirred and opened her eyes, focusing on her father's face with obvious recognition. "Hello, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy's home?" Lily gurgled happily and reached up with tiny fingers to touch his face. The transformation in James was remarkable. The cold businessman disappeared entirely, replaced by a man who clearly adored his child. Over the following weeks, James found himself coming home earlier than usual, always stopping by the nursery to check on Lily before heading to his study. He began to notice things that had escaped his attention during his frequent business trips. He saw how Lily's face lit up when Maria entered the room, how the baby calmed immediately at the sound of Maria's voice, how carefully Maria attended to every detail of Lily's care. He also began to notice Eleanor's continued absence from their daughter's daily life. When he mentioned it one evening over dinner, Eleanor's response was dismissive. "That's what we pay the help for, James. I hired an excellent nanny. There's no need for me to hover over every little thing. I have my own responsibilities with the foundation and my committees." "She's your daughter, Eleanor, not a project to be managed." Eleanor's laugh was brittle and cold. "Don't be so dramatic. Lily is perfectly fine. She's fed, clean, and healthy." "What more do you want?" But James was beginning to understand that what he wanted was impossible to buy or delegate. He wanted his daughter to be loved, not just cared for. And increasingly, it seemed that the only person in his household who truly loved Lily was the maid from the Bronx, who had sacrificed her own comfort to sit with a sick baby through the night. As autumn turned to winter, James made it a habit to work from home more often, conducting video conferences from his study while keeping an ear out for sounds from the nursery. He found himself looking forward to these glimpses of domestic life, watching Maria sing Spanish lullabies to Lily or seeing her patiently help the baby practice sitting up. One snowy December afternoon, James was reviewing contracts in his study when he heard Lily crying. The sound was different from her usual fussing, more distressed and urgent. He left his work and headed toward the nursery, but stopped short when he heard Maria's voice, low and soothing. "I know, mi amor. I know it hurts. But Maria won't let anything bad happen to you. Never. Ever." James peered around the doorframe to see Maria holding Lily against her shoulder, gently patting her back as the baby cried. On the changing table, he could see evidence of what had upset Lily. She had taken a tumble while trying to crawl and scraped her knee. "Shh, little one," Maria continued, switching between English and Spanish as she often did. "You're so brave, just like your papa. Yes, you are. You're going to grow up strong and smart, and Maria's going to make sure you know how loved you are." The words hit James like a physical blow. This woman, who had no biological connection to his daughter, was promising her love and protection with a fierce devotion that should have come from her mother. Maria was giving Lily something that all his money couldn't buy: unconditional love from someone who saw her not as an inconvenience or obligation, but as a precious gift. When Lily finally calmed down, Maria sat in the rocking chair and pulled out a small book, a children's story in Spanish that she had brought from home. As she read, translating the words into English for Lily's benefit, James found himself leaning against the doorframe, mesmerized by the peaceful scene. This was what he had imagined when he had insisted on having a child, despite Eleanor's reluctance. He had grown up in a cold, loveless household where his wealthy parents had treated him more like a future business asset than a son. He had wanted something different for his own child, but his demanding career and failing marriage had made that dream seem impossible. Now he was watching it happen, just not in the way he had expected. The love he had hoped to give Lily himself, the nurturing he had wanted her to receive from her mother, was being provided by a woman who asked for nothing in return except the chance to care for a child who needed her. That evening, after Maria had gone to her room and Lily was sleeping peacefully, James made a decision that would change everything. He called his personal assistant and asked her to arrange for a private investigator to look into Maria's background. Not because he suspected anything wrong, but because he wanted to understand the woman who had become so central to his daughter's well-being. The report came back 3 days later, and it revealed a story that made James respect Maria even more. She had immigrated from El Salvador 20 years ago, working multiple jobs to support her elderly mother and put her son through school. She had never been arrested, never missed a bill payment despite financial struggles, and had stellar references from every family she had worked for. But what struck James most was a note about her own family situation. Maria's son, Carlos, was a straight-A student who had been accepted to engineering programs at several top universities but couldn't afford to attend. Her mother required expensive medications for diabetes that weren't fully covered by insurance. Despite these financial pressures, Maria had never asked for advances on her salary or special favors. Reading the report, James realized that Maria understood sacrifice and unconditional love in ways that he and Eleanor never had. She gave everything to the people she cared about, expecting nothing in return. It was a foreign concept in his world of calculated transactions and strategic relationships. 2 weeks before Christmas, Eleanor announced that she would be spending the holidays in Switzerland with friends from her charity board. When James objected, suggesting that Lily's first Christmas should be spent as a family, Eleanor's response was predictably dismissive. She's 7 months old, James. She won't even remember it. Besides, the weather will be terrible here, and the Vanderbilts have that lovely chalet in St. Moritz. It's a perfect opportunity for networking with some very important donors. And what about Lily? What about us? Eleanor's smile was cold and perfectly manicured. You'll have the nanny. She's perfectly capable of handling whatever Lily needs. You might even enjoy playing father for a few days without my interference. The casual cruelty of her words stung, but James was beginning to realize that Eleanor had shown him who she was long ago. He had simply chosen not to see it. Their marriage had been based on social compatibility and shared ambitions, not love. He had told himself that would be enough, but watching Maria's devotion to Lily made him understand what they were all missing. On Christmas Eve, with Eleanor gone and the household staff given the day off, James found himself alone in the mansion with Lily and Maria. He had planned to work through the holiday, treating it like any other day, but as evening approached, he realized he didn't want to spend Christmas Eve isolated in his study. He made his way to the kitchen, where he could hear Maria humming softly as she prepared Lily's evening bottle. She looked up in surprise when he appeared in the doorway, clearly not expecting to see him in the servants' areas of the house. "Mr. Whitmore, is there something you need? I can bring it to your study?" "No, I was just—" He paused, realizing how foreign this felt to him. "I was wondering if you might like some company. It doesn't seem right for anyone to spend Christmas Eve alone." Maria's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "That's very kind of you, sir. Lily just finished her dinner, and I was about to give her a bath before bed. May I watch? I mean, would that be appropriate? I travel so much I feel like I'm missing everything." The vulnerability in his voice seemed to touch something in Maria. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. She would love to have her papa here." As James watched Maria gently bathe his daughter, pointing out how Lily liked to splash and play with her rubber duck, he realized that this simple domestic scene was more valuable to him than any business deal he had ever closed. For the first time in months, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. But as the evening wore on, James began to grapple with a troubling realization. The most important person in his daughter's life wasn't him or Eleanor. It was their employee, a woman who could be dismissed at any time, who had no legal rights to the child she clearly loved as her own. The thought of anything happening to disrupt Lily's relationship with Maria filled him with a dread that surprised him with its intensity. Something had to change, but James wasn't yet ready to admit how dramatically his world was about to shift. The Black Maid, Part 3. The new year brought unexpected changes to the Whitmore household. Eleanor returned from Switzerland with news that shocked everyone, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Over champagne in James's study, she announced that she had fallen in love with a Swiss businessman and wanted a divorce. "It's really for the best," she said with the casual air of someone discussing weekend plans. "We both know this marriage has been more of a business arrangement than anything else. Philippe can offer me the kind of lifestyle and attention I deserve, and you can focus entirely on your work and your precious daughter." The way she said, "your precious daughter," made it clear that Eleanor viewed Lily as solely James's responsibility and burden. When James asked about custody arrangements, Eleanor's response was swift and decisive. "I don't want custody, James. Joint custody would only complicate my new life in Europe. You can have full custody, and I'll take a generous settlement. It's really the most practical solution for everyone involved." As his marriage dissolved with the same cold efficiency that characterized most of Eleanor's decisions, James found himself facing single parenthood with a mixture of terror and relief. Terror because he had no idea how to balance his demanding career with raising a child. Relief because he would no longer have to watch Eleanor's indifference toward their daughter. Maria watched these developments with careful concern, knowing that her own position hung in the balance. New arrangements often meant new staff, and she had seen too many families go through transitions that left devoted caregivers suddenly unemployed. But when James called her to his study one evening in late January, his request was nothing like what she had expected. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me," he began, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "With Eleanor gone, I'm going to need more help with Lily. A lot more help. But beyond that, I need to know that she has consistency and stability in her life. She needs someone who will be there for her long term, not just until I find a new nanny." Maria nodded, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "The truth is," James continued, "you've become the most important person in Lily's world. She lights up when she sees you in a way she never did with Eleanor. You've given her something I didn't even realize she was missing: unconditional love and security. I can't bear the thought of disrupting that relationship." He paused, seeming to gather his courage for whatever came next. "I want to offer you a permanent position, not as a nanny or housekeeper, but as Lily's guardian. Legal guardian, with decision-making authority when I'm traveling, college fund contribution, health insurance, retirement planning, everything. I want to know that no matter what happens to me or my business, Lily will always have you." Maria felt tears spring to her eyes as she struggled to process what he was saying. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't understand. Are you adopting me?" James laughed, the first genuine laugh Maria had heard from him in months. "No, not adopting you, but I am asking if you would consider letting me adopt Carlos." Maria's world tilted on its axis. "Sir?" "I've been thinking about this for weeks," James explained, leaning forward earnestly. "Carlos is brilliant. His grades, his test scores, his recommendations are all outstanding. Any engineering program in the country would be lucky to have him, but financial barriers are holding him back. What if they didn't have to?" He pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk between them. "MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, he's been accepted to all of them. Full scholarships, plus living expenses, plus graduate school funding if he wants it. All arranged through a foundation I've established." Maria stared at the papers, unable to speak. "But that's not all," James continued. "I've been looking at properties in the area. There's a beautiful house about 10 minutes from here, big enough for you and Carlos and your mother, with a garden she'd love and space for Carlos to come home during breaks. The foundation would purchase it and hold it in trust for your family. Mr. Whitmore, this is too much. I can't accept such generosity. What would you want in return?" James's expression grew serious. "I want you to stay, Maria, not as an employee, but as family. I want Lily to grow up knowing she's loved and protected by someone who chose to be in her life, not someone who was obligated to be there. I want her to have siblings and grandparents, and the kind of warm, loving household that you would create." He stood and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. "I grew up in a house like this one. Cold, formal, empty of real affection. My parents provided everything money could buy, but nothing that actually mattered. I don't want that for Lily. I want her to grow up in a home where people care about each other, where family means something more than shared DNA or legal obligations." Maria felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. "You would do all this? For us? But why?" James turned back to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Because you saved my daughter, Maria, not just that night when she was sick, but every day since. You gave her love when her own mother couldn't. You gave her security and warmth and the foundation she'll need to become a good person. How do you put a price on that?" Over the following weeks, Maria wrestled with the decision. The practical part of her knew that accepting James's offer would transform her family's entire future. Carlos could attend his dream school without the crushing debt that had seemed inevitable. Her mother could receive the best medical care and live comfortably in her golden years. Maria herself would never again have to worry about employment or financial security. But the emotional implications were even more complex. Accepting would mean acknowledging that her relationship with Lily had transcended the boundaries of employer and employee. It would mean admitting that she loved this child as much as her own son, and that the thought of leaving her was unbearable. When she finally gave James her answer on a snowy February morning, it came from her heart rather than her head. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, we'll stay. We'll be Lily's family." The legal arrangements took months to finalize, but by summer the changes were complete. Carlos started at MIT in the fall, calling home excitedly each week to tell Maria about his classes and new friends. Maria's mother, Esperanza, had moved into the sunny room on the first floor of their new house, spending her days tending the garden and doting on baby Lily, who had begun calling her abuela with perfect pronunciation. James had insisted on one more change that surprised everyone, including himself. Rather than maintaining the formal relationship of employer and employee, he asked Maria to consider him family as well. "Lily needs to see adults who care about each other," he explained. "She needs to grow up understanding what healthy relationships look like." What developed between them was unlike anything either had experienced before. It wasn't romantic love, but something deeper and more sustainable. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and absolute devotion to the child at the center of their unconventional family. James learned to balance his business demands with family dinners and bedtime stories. Maria discovered that her opinions about Lily's education and upbringing were not only welcomed, but actively sought. Together, they created the kind of warm, stable home that neither had experienced in their own childhoods. On Lily's second birthday, as Maria watched her toddle around the garden chasing bubbles while James and Carlos taught her to count in both English and Spanish, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. She had started as a maid sleeping on a cold floor to comfort a sick baby. Now she was part of a family that had chosen each other deliberately, bound together not by obligation, but by love. The moment that had terrified her most, being discovered on that kitchen floor, had turned out to be the beginning of something beautiful. James's willingness to see past social conventions and recognize what really mattered had given all of them a second chance at family. As evening fell, and they gathered around the table for Lily's birthday dinner, Maria looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight. Her mother, healthy and content, teaching Lily Spanish words for colors. Carlos, home from college for the celebration, patiently helping Lily blow out her candles. James, no longer the cold businessman, but a father who read bedtime stories and attended every pediatrician appointment. And Lily herself, growing up secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who had chosen to love her, who would always put her well-being first, who understood that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about showing up for each other every single day. The little girl who had once cried alone in her nursery, while her mother attended charity, Galas was now the center of a family that celebrated her every milestone, worried over her every fever, and delighted in her growing personality. She would never doubt that she was wanted, valued, and deeply loved. Maria had learned that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as crises. Sometimes lying on a cold floor beside someone who needs you is exactly where you're supposed to be. And sometimes the people who seem the most powerful and self-sufficient are the ones who need family the most. As she tucked Lily into bed that night, whispering the same Spanish lullabies she had once sung to Carlos, Maria smiled at how perfectly imperfect their little family had become. They had all found exactly what they needed in each other, proving that love really can create miracles. even on the cold marble floors of Manhattan mansions.